Today we're heading to South Korea to explore the country's most mysterious disappearance. This is the story of a girl named Lee Yun-hee, and I'm sure it will surprise you. After all, you're on my channel, where from time to time we look into real crimes and strange phenomena. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to subscribe, and let's dive into today's story. This is one of the last known photographs of 29-year-old Lee Yun-hee, a bright and ambitious young woman from Namyangju, South Korea. As a student, Lee attended the renowned Women's University in Seoul, majoring in fine arts and statistics. But after graduating, she quickly realized that neither drawing nor statistics was her true calling. Aside from her family, Lee loved animals more than anything in the world. She had 2 dogs whom she cherished deeply, and she spent much of her free time watching nature documentaries and visiting zoos, farms, and animal shelters. And all of this left its mark, as it led her to make a bold decision at 25, to simply drop everything she had been doing before and radically change her course of study, eventually becoming a veterinarian. Her family was against it, believing that chasing such a dream was a waste of time and money. They thought that at her age she should already be thinking about other things, like finally finding a man, getting married, and settling down. But being a smart and modern young woman, Lee decided to take the risk. In 2003, she enrolled in veterinary school, and by 2006, she had only 1 semester left before graduation, diligently preparing for her final exams. To have at least some money while studying, she spent much of her free time tutoring younger students, including the children of her professors. Thus, she supported herself during her studies. On June 2nd, she was walking home after finishing one of these private lessons. As she was walking down the street, 2 men on a motorcycle sped past her and snatched her purse, taking her wallet, ID, and, crucially for this story, her mobile phone. 2 witnesses saw what happened and chased after the men in their van, pursuing the motorcycle for several blocks. This continued until the thieves turned into a narrow alley and finally disappeared for good. That same evening, Yun-hee, visibly upset, returned to the university and told everyone she knew that she wouldn't be able to reach anyone by phone for a while. "Just thinking about those bastards makes me want to cry," she told them. "It's hard to believe the world can be such a terrible place." Unfortunately, the girl didn't even know half of it. It's no wonder that such an alluring and mysterious South Korea has captured the minds of millions. The main reasons are these videos, like the one you're watching right now, and dramas. And all of this is united by one thing: that everything in South Korea is very unusual. And their storylines are always diverse. Everyone can find something for themselves. And have you ever thought that every drama has its own original source? For example, in April, Inspiria Publishing released a new title in the drama thriller series, bestsellers from Korea that have been adapted for the screen. The Day of the Kidnapping by Chung Hye-young. Kim Young-jun is having a really hard time. He's broke, unemployed, and his daughter is very ill. And then his ex-wife suggests kidnapping the child of wealthy parents to get money for treatment. But on the night they plan to do it, Myung-jun accidentally hits a girl with his car and then realizes that she's exactly the one he needs. The girl loses her memory from the accident, and he starts pretending to be her father. And later he finds out that her real parents were killed on the very night they were supposed to kidnap her. A psychological thriller with morally ambiguous characters, where the kidnapper and the victim almost switch places. All in all, it's clear why the book became a bestseller and the basis for a popular drama series. Details can be found at the link in the description. In 3 days. On June 5th, Yun-hee and her classmates completed their final practicum of the semester, which involved performing surgery on animals. To celebrate the occasion, they went out for drinks with their professors on the outskirts of the city. Lee was unsure whether she should go to the party. She felt that she hadn't done well during the surgery, and some members of her group saw her crying in one of the laboratory restrooms. They managed to comfort her and eventually convinced her to join the celebration. The evening began at a karaoke bar at 10 p.m., and by that time, it seemed that her mood had noticeably improved. From there, a group of 40 students and their professors headed to the nearest pub, where they ate, drank, and reminisced about their time at university. Yes, don't be surprised, this is completely normal for Korea. However, at 2:30 in the morning, our heroine came out of the pub's restroom with a frightened look on her face and quickly left the party without saying goodbye to anyone. One of her classmates, a 27-year-old man known as Kim, noticed her hasty departure and ran after her. Reportedly, Lee and Kim were very close, as they had attended the same school before university, and he wanted to make sure she was okay. When he asked her what had happened, she allegedly said that someone had been peeping at her in the restroom but did not go into details. Lee lived alone in a small studio apartment located about 1.5 kilometers from the pub. That is, it was about a 15 to 20-minute walk. Concerned, Kim offered at least to help carry her backpack and walk her home. That evening, according to him, before they reached her apartment, she told him, "Well, here we are," hinting that he didn't need to walk her all the way to the door. They said goodbye, and Lee disappeared into a dark alley. Kim turned around and walked in the opposite direction. But feeling uneasy, he turned back and started watching her window. Seeing that the light came on inside, he made sure that Yoon-hee was safe and headed home. He also lived nearby. On Tuesday, the next day, June 6th, South Korea was celebrating Memorial Day, a national holiday. So it didn't seem strange to anyone that there was no news from the girl after the party. Only on June 7th, when she didn't show up for her final classes, did people start to find out and ask where she was. Yoon-hee was a very responsible and hardworking student who rarely, if ever, missed lectures. So her absence was noteworthy. After class, her friend Min went to check on her at her apartment. But when she knocked, no one answered. Of course, she couldn't reach her by phone either. And Min thought that she was just tired and needed a day off. But when on June 8th, she missed classes again and didn't show up for planned meetings with friends, 4 people from her group, including Min and Kim, decided to pay her another visit. When they knocked on the door, they were immediately met by La and her dog, but even then, no one opened the door. Even back then in Korea, doors were equipped with digital locks that required a code to open. But since none of them knew the combination, Min called the girl's older sister. Unfortunately, she also hadn't heard from her for several days and didn't know the code to unlock the door either. All of this seriously worried the group. In the end, the classmates contacted the police, who in turn called the landlord to come and open the door. As soon as the investigators entered the small apartment, they immediately noticed an unpleasant smell. It became clear that no one had taken the dogs out for a walk, and all this time they had been left alone at home. They found the girl's 2 puppies lying on the floor, weak from hunger and thirst. It was obvious they had tried to search the apartment for food. There were scraps of paper and clothing scattered everywhere. Interestingly, the dried bouquet of flowers that used to decorate the wall in a spot unreachable for the dogs was now lying on the floor. Yoon-hee's backpack, which she had taken with her to that party, was also on the floor. This indicated that on the night she met up with her classmates and professors, she did in fact make it home. Despite the state of the apartment, the police initially did not suspect anything was wrong. They assumed she might have left voluntarily to rest and relax, since nothing was missing from the home and there were no signs of forced entry. The police thought she would return soon. But this explanation did not satisfy her friends. Not only did they contact Yoon-hee's family members and confirm that she wasn't with any of them, but the fact that she had left her dogs without food and water was completely out of character for an animal lover. And disappearing without telling anyone was also not Lee's style. The Korean police are often criticized for poor investigative work. And not satisfied with their conclusion, 2 classmates, Min and Bae, went to the police station to file a missing person report in person. Meanwhile, the other 2, Kim and A, stayed in the apartment to wait for the girl's parents. But the apartment was a mess, and not wanting to put the girl's family in an awkward position, Kim and A decided to tidy up a bit and clean the place. They washed the floors, threw away all the scraps of paper and dog-chewed fabrics, did several loads of dirty blankets and clothes in the washing machine, and in short, carelessly destroyed a huge amount of evidence. Moreover, when Lee's sister came to inspect the apartment, she found a cigarette butt on the veranda. Assuming it belonged to her sister and not wanting their parents to find out she had started smoking, the sister decided to throw it away. What can I say? Just brilliant. Although that cigarette butt could very well have belonged to the girl, we'll never know for sure now. A DNA test could have confirmed that someone else had been in the apartment, but alas. Kim and A have deeply regretted ever since that they cleaned up the crime scene, not realizing at the time what a huge mistake they were making. Since the police didn't investigate anything or ask them not to touch anything, the thought never even crossed their minds. When the girl's parents arrived that same evening, they immediately realized that 2 items were missing from their daughter's apartment. The first was a hammer. Her father, Dong, clearly remembers insisting that his daughter keep it at home just in case because, as he said, a hammer is the most useful tool in the house. He had personally given it to Lee as a gift and knew that she kept it in plain sight. The other missing item was her favorite coffee table. Lee was especially fond of this old piece of furniture. She always ate at it and used it as a bedside table. On the morning of June 5th, about 16 hours before Lee was last seen, one of her male friends, Webb, came over to fix one of the wobbly legs on the table. He confirmed that Lee had no intention of throwing it away. He stayed in the apartment for about 30 minutes, helped with the repair, and after that, the pair immediately left for class. That evening, we was not present at the party and never saw Lee again. It is worth noting that there were rumors that Lee and we were more than just friends. And although there is no concrete evidence of this, in a strange twist, while Lee's father was walking around the neighborhood looking for clues, he stumbled upon the missing tabletop between 2 dumpsters near the apartment. Hidden among a pile of other discarded furniture, the tabletop had 4 metal legs, which had been unscrewed and were lying separately. Dong suggested that the tabletop was either damaged during the conflict, or it might have retained fingerprints, blood, or the perpetrator's DNA, which prompted him to get rid of it. He also feared that his daughter's life was ended in the apartment with the very hammer he had given her as a gift, and that the killer took the tool with him when he left. Despite the family's concerns, the authorities planned to wait a few more days before reopening the girl's case. Since there had been no news from the student for almost a week, an investigative task force was assembled on June 10th with the goal of bringing her home as soon as possible. The team returned to Lee's apartment, but by that time, Kim and A had cleaned it so thoroughly that no fingerprints, DNA, footprints, blood, or any other evidence could be found. So the police had to resort to other investigative methods. They decided to go with the tried and true approach. They went door to door, asking other residents of the building if they had heard any noise early in the morning on June 6th. Since the apartment walls were not soundproofed, it was quite likely that other residents would have heard something if there had been any noise. However, none of them reported hearing anything unusual that night. At least, none of those who agreed to speak with the officers did. Some of the neighbors refused to cooperate with the investigation or speak with the detectives at all. Although no unusual sounds were heard that night, one of the residents reported that a man had been following her a few days earlier. She described how a sinister-looking young man followed her all the way to her front door. Afraid that he was waiting for her to unlock the door so he could burst in and do who knows what, she decided to confront him face to face. In the end, she scared him off. She speculated that the same man might have turned his attention to Lee. In South Korea, stalking is a widespread problem, and such incidents do happen. In May 2019, even in Seoul, a young woman was stalked by a man. When she closed the door, he rushed at it, but fortunately she managed to lock it in time. He stood behind the door for several minutes before leaving. Stories like these have long been a source of concern for women in Korea, and some believe that Lee could have fallen victim to a similarly deranged stranger. However, according to statistics, the overwhelming majority of missing persons know the perpetrator. Therefore, believing that Lee was not a random victim, the task force began interviewing more than 40 participants of the June celebration. Unfortunately, none of them were able to shed light on what happened to the poor girl after the party ended, except for Kim, who claimed that he walked her to the alley and soon saw the light turn on in her apartment. He and another 21 people were subjected to a polygraph test, and all of them passed without any issues. Although it should be noted that such tests are quite unreliable. The task force combed the city and the surrounding mountains with the help of dogs and put up tens of thousands of flyers around the city asking for any information. And this led to nothing. The investigator was left with no witnesses, no forensic evidence, and no other leads. Except for one. In the building next to her house, there was another apartment with a clear and unobstructed view of her windows. Whoever lived there could have watched her every move. After making inquiries with the company renting out the apartment, the detectives learned that the room was unoccupied and had not been lived in for several months. However, when they inspected the room, they found several empty cigarette packs and used tissues by the window facing Lee's apartment. And from this evidence too, they were unable to extract any usable DNA. Up until this point, Lee's friends had not lost hope that their friend would turn up safe and sound, that the stress from exams and that motorcycle incident when her bag was stolen had simply overwhelmed her. That she broke down and spontaneously decided to disappear for a few weeks, forgetting about her dogs and responsibilities, that she voluntarily threw out the table and hammer because she no longer needed them, that there was an innocent explanation for the napkins in the empty apartment. But this optimism soon faded when cybercrime experts examined her computer. According to recovered records, someone accessed Lee's desktop at 2:59 a.m. on June 6th, around the same time she was supposed to return home from the party. This person opened Naver, a popular search engine known as the Google of South Korea, and searched for the terms sexual harassment, contact the police, and 112. In Korea, the police number is the same as in Russia. This search session lasted only 3 minutes and ended at 3:02 a.m. The computer was manually shut down an hour and 19 minutes later at 4:21 a.m. Like many other people, Lee usually kept her computer running in the background, rarely turning it off. So this was suspicious. Given the timing, one might assume that this was not the case. It can be assumed that Lee performed the search almost immediately after entering through the front door. Judging by what she searched for, detectives believe she may have been harassed either at the party or on her way home. Since she didn't have a phone, it makes perfect sense that she was looking for ways to report the incident online. But 3 minutes later, she was interrupted. Later, experts discovered that between 2:15 p.m. and 5:21 p.m. on June 8th, someone turned on Lee's desktop computer and deleted her chat history in Nadon, a Korean messenger. It was no longer possible to recover chat logs from 22:48:04 to 03:04:08. A special program, not very well known in South Korea, was used for the mass deletion of conversations. This suggests that the person responsible was knowledgeable about computers. Someone clearly did not want the authorities to find out who the girl was talking to and what they discussed. Strangely, on June 10th, someone logged into Lee's account on a popular music website and checked her email. The police traced the IP address. It turned out to be a motel in Gunsan, which is quite far from where the girl disappeared, but they found no signs of suspicious behavior on the surveillance cameras. And most importantly, there was no trace of Lee herself. It now became clear to the task force that Lee had been murdered and had not left home of her own free will. If they could have found her body, they would almost certainly have been able to gather key evidence that would help them find her killer. But to this day, Lee's whereabouts and technically her condition remain unknown. And although she is almost certainly dead, her remains have never been found. And there is probably a very good reason for that. As part of their training, the veterinary faculty regularly collected animal carcasses for students to dissect. After the work was done, the remains of the animals cut into pieces were collected by an agency and sent to an incinerator. All the biomass was sealed in special medical bags, and according to company policy, the collectors were not allowed to look inside them. But to be honest, they weren't particularly eager to do so anyway. On a typical day, about 40 kilograms of animal remains were placed in the incinerator. On June 8th, 2 days after Lee disappeared, 110 kilograms were incinerated, 70 kilograms more than usual. The school worked with various animals: dogs, cats, cows, pigs. Some of them were much heavier than others. But according to the records, there were no large animals that day. Since the ashes were destroyed before forensic experts could examine them, all we can do is guess. Could that extra weight have belonged to Lee? She weighed only 45 kilograms. But perhaps the remaining extra weight came from other evidence. If she really ended up in the incinerator, it means that whoever took her life had access to the biomass disposal room in the laboratory. For example, one of the professors. The first person of interest is one of Lee's instructors, a man known only as Professor Moon. This is the very professor whose children Lee was tutoring on June 2nd, the day her purse was stolen. Several students reported that Moon behaved inappropriately toward the girl, often even trying to flirt with her. On the night of the celebration, he tried to sit next to her, but she asked him to move away, calling him a scoundrel. It was suspicious that Moon's alibi was remarkably inconsistent. Initially, he told investigators that he left the party early and returned home at 2 a.m., but later changed his story when other investigators said he had only left after Lee had gone. On the internet, Koreans are still debating whether Moon did something to Lee in the pub's restroom, since right after that, he could have followed her home after the party. Not wanting to lose his job, ruin his reputation or his marriage, he could have entered her apartment. And it's quite possible that he took her life inside and somehow transported her body to the biomass collection room on campus. Or even more wildly, he took her there against her will while she was still alive, and finished the job there. The second suspect, of course, is the unnamed person, a stranger who became obsessed with Lee. Many people don't think it's a coincidence that someone stole the student's purse just a few days before her disappearance. In South Korea, thefts themselves are quite rare, and most likely the perpetrator wanted to get hold of Lee's personal belongings, possibly even the key to her apartment or her ID with her home address. Although many agree that this version is unlikely, it still remains within the realm of possibility. This brings us to the third and most interesting person. We are certain about one suspect, said Lee's father. The person he was talking about was named Kim. Although he tried to present himself as the perfect gentleman, all we have are Kim's own words that he offered to walk the girl home after the party. There is no surveillance footage showing the two of them walking side by side to Lee's apartment, and none of the attendees reported seeing them leave together. This led some to suggest that he followed her to her apartment from a distance. However, personally, I believe that she left with him willingly. First of all, because Lee was rumored to be close to him. And secondly, because her purse had just been stolen and she probably felt especially vulnerable. It's hard for me to believe that she would walk down a dark alley alone and wouldn't want Kim to walk her right to her door. The only thing known for sure is that Kim was in love with her. This was no secret among their classmates, and Lee herself often joked about it with her friends. There are unconfirmed reports that Kim displayed obsessive tendencies. For example, he secretly collected strands of Lee's hair and kept meticulous records of her activities in a diary. Some even speculated that he enrolled in the same university only because Lee had transferred there. Nevertheless, she seemed to love him and trusted him. She wore the clothes he gave her, spent time with him one-on-one outside of class, and even listed him as an emergency contact. Many joked that Kim was the girl's third puppy, an innocent, loyal dog who was always by her side and followed her everywhere. But others felt that, in fact, Lee also had feelings for Kim. According to Kim himself, they kissed 4 times, but it never went further than that. Although they were not a couple, it can be said with confidence that their relationship was ambiguous. It was clearly something more than friendship. But if Kim cared so much about Lee, why do so many consider him the main suspect in her case? Because of one piece of evidence. If you remember on June 8th, when Kim and his classmates went to check on Lee, they couldn't get into her apartment because of the digital lock and they had to call the authorities to gain access. But here's the catch. Kim slipped up. In fact, before this, he had visited Lee's apartment multiple times to look after her dogs and deliver study assignments, and he was well aware of the access code. On one hand, he was protecting Lee's reputation. He didn't want to tell the others that he knew the door code. Such information could lead people to the wrong conclusions. And since South Korea is a very conservative country by our standards, he might have just been trying to avoid awkwardness. That's one side of it. On the other hand, it's all rather suspicious. Not only did Kim know how to open the door for the girl, but he also decided to stay and help A clean up the crime scene. This not only gave him a chance to cover up his actions, but also enough time to delete the girl's search history before her family arrived. And indeed, as I already mentioned, this mass deletion happened between 2:15 p.m. and 5:21 p.m. on June 8th. During this time, Kim and A were the only ones in the apartment. When they were asked if either of them had turned on the computer, both replied, "I honestly don't remember." But what about the motive? There are several possibilities. Kim could have snapped after being rejected by the girl, or he might have heard rumors that she and Vey were more than just friends. Consumed by jealousy, he took Lee's life and destroyed the coffee table that Vey had repaired. This act might have had some symbolic meaning for him. When reporters spoke with Kim in 2017, he was married, had children, and ran his own animal hospital. Lee's father, Dong, organized several protests outside Kim's business, accusing him of being involved in his daughter's disappearance. In response, Kim filed a defamation lawsuit against Dong, as a result of which the court prohibited Dong from approaching Kim's building. Kim claims that the media have defamed him and that he has nothing to do with the girl's disappearance. No charges have been brought against him. The lead detective who worked on the case expressed regret that he and his team focused on Kim as the sole suspect and did not take other theories seriously, hinting that he believes Kim is innocent. Unlike the girl's family, he believes that the most likely culprit is Professor Moon, who used his position to lure the student into the laboratory and ultimately into the incineration chamber. In 2017, the girl's sister received a phone call. Lee doesn't have any money to make a call, so she asked me to pass on this message. She misses you very much. The call was traced to a public phone booth in Gunsan, and they even found the person who made the call. It was a 27-year-old man with severe brain damage. It was determined that he had no connection to the case. That same year, a psychic medium contacted the authorities. She claimed that she had communicated with Lee's spirit and said that her body was hidden in a sewage treatment facility. Surprisingly, no evidence was found to support the story of the charlatan. Today, nearly 18 years later, the search for her continues. Since then, her photos have been made publicly available, and even an age-progressed image showing what she might look like now. "I'm already 82 years old, and I don't know when my time will come," says her now elderly father, Dong. "But before I go, I want to know whether my daughter is alive or not." To bring her home, Dong and his wife sold all their possessions and offered a reward of 100 million won to anyone who could provide information about the girl's whereabouts. That reward has never been claimed. A big thank you to my sponsors on Boosty, who are right now watching videos that aren't available on the channel. It's all thanks to them, and especially to Marco Wu, Marnell, Marco Toxville, Glenn Cash, Flexbox, Alexander Lin, Koshi Dance, Shogun, Kai, Noki Noru, and Smirnov. And of course, thank you very much for watching.